all time.
I thought, oh, that's the most exciting thing I've ever seen.
And over 7 decades after he first climbed to the top of the box office, he's still a worldwide phenomenon.
King Kong is totally part of our culture.
It's unique in the history of films, really.
Get ready to meet the men and women who turned their own life and death adventures into the ultimate big screen blockbuster.
We're millionaires, boys! I'll share it with all of you!
And find out how special effects pioneers transformed an 18-inch puppet into a Hollywood giant.
What I loved about Kong when I was 9, I still love about movie making.
It's time for the story behind the biggest film legend of them all. On Animal Icons, King Kong. Long before terrifying T-Rexes rampaged through Jurassic Park, and before The Lord of the Rings transported us to imaginary worlds, the 1933 fantasy classic King Kong took audiences on an exhilarating ride that not only changed the way movies were made, it also introduced one of the screen's most unforgettable characters. Moviegoers seeking escape from the brutal hardships of the Great Depression were transported to another world by the film's gripping story and trailblazing special effects.
The stuff for which movies are made. Adventure, to make you wonder if it's true.
King Kong had this wonderful world of fantasy. It took you by the hand from the mundane world of the Depression and put you into the most fantastic world that is possible.
I remember as a kid, I would pretend I was sick and ditch school so I could stay home and see King Kong when it came on TV if I saw it in the TV guide there.
You can't escape, you know. The idea was escaping from him, but I never have, and I suppose I never will.
Movie makers like Steven Spielberg, effects wizard Ray Harryhausen, and director John Landis consider King Kong one of the most inspiring films they'd ever seen.
It's just an extraordinary movie. It's original and insane and exciting and totally American. We'll get a giant gorilla. He'll climb the biggest building in the world. You know, we'll think of the New York. It's one of those movies that's been ripped off more than any other movie.
Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson says Kong is the reason he became a filmmaker. In 2004, he even launched a big-budget remake to star Jack Black and Naomi Watts. It was a project Jackson dreamed of practically since the time he first saw King Kong at the age of 9.
Kong was on television in New Zealand. It was on a Friday night, 9 o'clock on a Friday night, I remember very clearly. And it was, to me, that was the moment that I fell in love with what movies could really do in terms of sweeping you into an escapist world, take you on an experience that you're never going to have in your real life. In Kong, I loved the escapism, I loved the adventure, and then at the end of the movie, I cried when Kong fell off the Empire State Building. So I also felt the power that movies can do what they can do to you emotionally.
Why, in a few months we'll be up in lights on Broadway. Kong, the eighth wonder of the world!
The mighty Kong has also proved a king of advertising and commercial products. He's appeared on everything from posters and T-shirts to salt and pepper shakers and video games. After all, where would Donkey Kong be without the character known to his fans as the eighth wonder of the world? Today, many tourists flock to New York's Empire State Building, not because it was once the world's tallest skyscraper, but because it's where a certain simian had his final confrontation with civilization.
King Kong spread the word of the Empire State Building around the world. Seeing King Kong climb the building really made the building famous. A lot of times I'll hear visitors and tourists, people on top of the building will look down and say, oh, is that where King Kong was? Or, you know, do you think King Kong will come back? A lot of my coworkers and I will joke about, you know, the big gorilla climbing the building. A lot of people are still fascinated by that, by Fay Ray in his hand. In the summertime, we very often hire people. They wear suits. It's not the real King Kong. And, it's funny because kids will be walking down the hallway with mom and dad, and all of a sudden King Kong will jump out, and they just scream and holler, and they just love it.
So what is it about the character of King Kong that inspires both fear and sympathy from audiences?
What he represents is what people think of apes, what the popular conception of an ape is, something that's really large, really dangerous, really violent, and really intimidating. Apes are fascinating because they're enough like us that we can project a lot of ourselves onto them. We can imagine what they're thinking, we can imagine what they're doing, we can imagine their motivations and how they feel, and it seems plausible that our projections are accurate because they're so much like us in so many ways.
Perhaps no one better understood the symbolic force of King Kong than the two men behind his creation. Producers Marion C. Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack didn't just make movies packed with adventure. Wartime aviators, government spies, animal hunters, they lived for adventure.
Marion C. Cooper was a flyer in World War I. He got shot down behind enemy lines. He escaped. He had quite a career. Schoedsack had been a combat cameraman during World War I, the Signal Corps, and a kindred spirits, really.
They were classic Hollywood entrepreneurs. They used to go to exotic places and film exotic things.
During the 1920s, most filmmakers worked safely inside the walls of Hollywood studios. But Cooper and Schoedsack risked their lives in Persia, Thailand, and Africa to create films that were half documentary, half action-adventure. The result were box office hits that dazzled audiences with exotic images at a time when most Americans never traveled outside their home state.
Everything you saw in those movies were the real thing. They went through wars making those movies. They went through danger. Ernest J. Schoedsack had been a soldier of fortune. He was 6'6". He had fought with Lawrence of Arabia. He had hunted Bengal tigers in India. Marion C. Cooper, who put up the money and produced all these movies, he had been a general. And if he didn't like something, he would throw his hat on the floor and jump up and down on his hat. And throw a fit. Have you ever seen a man get angry and jump up and down on his own hat? I mean, it was priceless. He always wanted a bigger circus, a bigger production.
In 1931, Marion C. Cooper gave himself the ultimate challenge. He set out to top himself with an epic Hollywood fantasy originally titled The Beast.
He had been impressed with a book that his great-uncle gave him when he was 6 years old that was written in 1861 by Paul Deschalus called Exploration and Adventures in Equatorial Africa. And in there were accounts of finding gorillas. At that time, there was very little known about gorillas. A lot of the areas in Africa were unexplored. So this man was writing about his adventures and coming upon the gorilla. So when the time came when he was thinking about the next project, he suddenly thought about this giant gorilla.
Cooper and his team drew on classic themes from myth and literature, from the tale of Moby Dick to Beauty and the Beast, to create the film ultimately known as King Kong. The story would center on a team of adventurous filmmakers who travel to a distant island where they encounter a deadly giant. Any resemblance between the characters and Kong's real-life filmmakers was strictly intentional.
The story is about Carl Denham, kind of big-time producer, and he hears about this mythical being, Kong, on this island, Skull Island. They keep encountering monsters, a Stegosaurus, some kind of brontosaurus, giant snake monster that comes up. Kong fights a pterodactyl. It's non-stop.
The only thing Kong can't overcome is his unexpected attachment to Ann Darrow, a struggling actress and the only female among the human travelers.
They loved the idea of Beauty and the Beast. We still love the idea of a girl being so protected by a wild animal. It's amazing. It's an instinct that all human beings love, and they played upon that instinct.
Cooper cast Fay Wray as Ann Darrow, actor Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham, and Bruce Cabot as gung-ho sailor Jack Driscoll.
Cooper thinks of Fay Wray because he's worked with Fay Wray before, and they're friends. And Fay Wray would be perfect for this. So he approaches Fay Wray, and Fay Wray says, what is the story about?
Ray never forgot the way Cooper pitched her the project.
He said, Fay, you're going to have the tallest, darkest leading man in Hollywood. I was hoping it was going to be Cary Grant. Then when they showed me the fellow they had in mind, he was less attractive.
When Animal Icons returns, movie magic turns an 18-inch puppet into the biggest show on Earth. 50 years before computer effects, producer Marion C. Cooper had to find a way to bring the 40-foot star of King Kong to life. Part of the solution was to build a full-sized portion of the ape, starting with a giant head and an arm big enough to hold Kong's leading lady, Fay Wray.
They did have a huge arm that was large enough to have fingers that went around my waist and lifted me up.
The giant head and hand were used briefly in the film, but the Kong who captured moviegoers' hearts was actually only 18 inches tall. Sculpted by the gifted artist Marcel Delgado, this movable figure was brought to life one painstaking frame at a time by the man now considered one of the most influential individuals in special effects, Willis O'Brien.
Willis O'Brien as a character, he had gone through a number of different professions before he became a stop-motion animator. He was a boxer and a cowboy, a Wild West kind of Universal man that ended up ultimately bringing all that stuff together in this high-adventure subject.
Willis O'Brien was the father of stop-motion animation. And his great triumph, of course, was King Kong. He did The Lost World way back in 1925, which was about dinosaurs. He made stars of the dinosaurs. People remember the dinosaurs, but they don't remember who was in the picture.
Look at any of the Jurassic Park movies, and you'll see that all the dinosaur movements are based on the stop motion of Willis O'Brien, who said, well, this is how T-Rexes move, and everyone went, okay. And that's the way it's been ever since.
Here was O'Brien working on a picture called Creation, which dealt with prehistoric beasts and so forth, using the stop-motion technique. And suddenly Cooper thought, wait a minute, this is the way I'll do Kong.
Adventure to make you wonder if it's true, while your eyes convince you that it is.
He gave King Kong a personality that his name is up there in lights as big as Clark Gable, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis. He's a star of Hollywood, and he was just a little figure about 18 inches high covered with rabbit fur. But O'Brien had that technique of giving him pathos.
And that little puppet had such emotion and power and reality.
In some ways, Kong did reflect several actual ape characteristics.
How's he like a real ape? Well, he doesn't have a tail. That's good on the ape side. He walks on all fours, and he's a knuckle walker, which is another ape characteristic. That's good, but he's way too big. He's much bigger than any primate that we know of.
The love story between Kong and Ann Darrow also seemed a bit of a stretch, to say the least.
Apes can relate very directly to humans, and I think develop very strong attachments to them. Whether or not an ape in the wild would develop a romantic attachment or a fascination with a human that just arrived on his doorstep, as this character does, seems sort of unlikely, because apes in the wild are typically very fearful of humans. The Fay Wray character, I mean, she's tiny. She's the size of his fist. So the idea that he had romantic designs on this tiny creature seems somewhat unrealistic and a little bit impractical from just an anatomical point of view.
Sometimes I had to imagine him being like 20 feet, sometimes 40 feet, and I was in charge of that. In my own imagination, I could have him any size I wanted. So that was a very good feeling, to be able to just dream him up as I went along.
Unfortunately for some of his co-stars, Kong wasn't above nibbling on humans during his greatest moments of rage. But but it's the kind of behavior that anthropologists consider more fiction than fact.
Gorillas don't eat meat at all. Now, whether or not King Kong was actually swallowing those people is hard to tell. I mean, he was kind of chewing on them and spitting them out as a sort of form of protecting himself or doing away with these noxious pests.
Perhaps no scene in King Kong was more impressive than the movie's dramatic climax, in which Kong, after being brought to Manhattan, escapes his captors and scales what was then the ultimate symbol of modern civilization, the Empire State Building.
Back then it was the tallest building in the world, and it was a novelty. People, I think, thought the developers and builders of the building were crazy to build a building that tall. So having the Empire State Building seemed like the perfect match for King Kong.
He climbed it like it was a tree. He gets to the top, and modern machinery, these airplanes, shoot him down, and that sequence generates tremendous sympathy for the ape. A little bit of trivia. In the, the biplanes that shoot him down, they cut to the two pilots, the guy, that's Cooper and Shozak. The movie is basically Beauty and the Beast, and that's what Denham says at the end. They say, looks like the planes got him. Carl Denham says, no, 'twas Beauty killed the Beast. And your sympathy's entirely with Kong. Entirely with the monster. That's something.
At the time King Kong was released, on April 10th, 1933, America was in the grip of the harshest economic depression it had ever known. But nothing could stop the eighth wonder of the world from becoming a box office blockbuster. Americans who struggled to find enough money for food sacrificed to save the price of a ticket and packed movie houses across the country.
They went to see King Kong because it was the great escape, and a greater escape you can't imagine.
When Kong opened, it was such a sensation. I mean, they had like 3 theaters on Hollywood Boulevard playing 24 hours, 2 theaters on Broadway playing 24 hours. I mean, people had never seen anything like that.
For some moviegoers, like future special effects master Ray Harryhausen, Kong was literally a life-changing experience.
I walked into Grauman's Chinese Cinema on Hollywood Boulevard, and I haven't been the same since. So that shows how influential a film can be. I was so awestruck by seeing prehistoric dinosaurs on the screen. I was only 13 at the time. And it really influenced my whole interest in filmmaking.
Within months of his triumphant debut, King Kong was well on his way to becoming a worldwide box office phenomenon. And as audiences were about to see for themselves, Kong hadn't fought his last big screen battle. When Animal Icons returns, we'll journey back to Skull Island for a close encounter with the Son of Kong. The success of King Kong created such a sensation in 1933 that within 8 months of its release, RKO Studios rushed a low-budget sequel onto movie screens, The Son of Kong.
It was made very quickly and cheaper, and they used some of the same cast, and it was much more played for comedy.
Believe it or not, there's a little Kong. What? A little... How little?
Son of Kong has some great stuff. The opening of Son of Kong is terrific because it's very realistic. The opening of it is everyone's after Carl Denham to get money. They all want to sue him because of the damage done by his monkey in the first one. And he has to get out of town.
The Son of Kong may have been a quickie sequel designed to cash in on the popularity of King Kong, but the film still packed an emotional punch.
It had a really traumatic ending. When I was a kid, I was devastated by it because the island, has like a lost continent of Atlantis. It blows up and volcanoes and it breaks apart and everybody's drowning. And Kong is holding up Carl Denham to save his life. Poor Kong is down there holding up Carl Denham, and and I just, as a kid, it destroyed me.
Over the next decade, producers Marion C. Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack could never outrun the success of King Kong. And in 1949, they decided to bring another big ape to the screen. With help from stop-motion master Willis O'Brien.
See Mighty Joe Young as he savagely resists capture in his native Africa.
On Mighty Joe Young, the team was joined by O'Brien's young assistant, Ray Harryhausen, and 19-year-old leading lady Terry Moore.
See the most fantastic relationship between beast and beauty.
One of the great periods in my life was to be able to work with Willis O'Brien when he started Mighty Joe Young. I was with him when he started his first sketch. He would make many drawings. Then they would write a lot of his ideas into the script.
Mighty Joe Young was so much sweeter than King Kong. Mighty Joe Young was a very good, kind gorilla.
Mighty Joe Young was raised by the character portrayed by Terry Moore in the jungle. And, suddenly, once again, the invaders come. Again, he's brought to Hollywood as a nightclub attraction.
See Mighty Joe Young, enraged by Hollywood pranksters, destroy Filmland's swankiest nightclub on the fabulous Sunset Strip.
It was very challenging. Mighty Joe Young was my friend who wasn't there. And when I'd say, want a banana, Joe, and throw him bananas, I was throwing him up to a prop man who would catch them. But he was so real to me because I always saw him in my mind's eye. Kids come up to me and they say, are you the little girl who Mighty Joe Young lifted up on the piano? That scene is so remembered.
The picture that's alive with the most sensational action thrills ever filmed. Mightier than King Kong, Mighty Joe Young.
Unfortunately, at the end, he saves children from the burning orphanage, and so he's able to go back home and presumably live happily ever after.
When my children would watch the movie, they'd say, where is Mighty Joe Young? I built such a fantasy around him. I said he lives in Africa now. He lives in a condo. He has his own swimming pool. And, Mighty Joe Young became very real to me and has been all my life. I mean, I just love him to pieces.
Amazingly, the original King Kong had been ignored on Oscar night, but Mighty Joe Young went on to earn an Academy Award for Best Special Effects of 1949.
The first time I saw the movie with the gorilla there, I was amazed because I just thought, well, I have a gorilla who's not there, a producer who jumps up and down on his hat, and I just didn't see how that movie was ever going to come together, and it miraculously did.
But there was still only one King Kong. And when the 1933 classic returned to movie screens in the 1950s, the Big Ape proved he was still top banana.
It was reissued in the very early 50s, heavily advertised on television, one of the very first films to be advertised that way, and it made a great deal more money that time than it had in any of its previous reissues.
His latest success also gave rise to the notion that as far as Hollywood was concerned, bigger was definitely better.
Here is a desperate plunge into the black depths of the earth, where the beast spawns its terrible progeny.
Kong's profits helped unleash a new legion of giant creature features, from the massive ants of Them to the title character of Tarantula.
The giant bug movies of the 1950s actually owed their existence largely to King Kong. They wanted to do some other kind of monsters, so they chose insects.
During the 1950s, King Kong also became one of the first films to be heavily promoted and frequently shown on television. An entire new generation was introduced to the film, and for the kids who first saw Kong on their small TV screens, the gorilla who once terrified viewers now seemed more friendly than fierce. The result was the next stage of Kong's evolution, as the character became a favorite of children around the world. During the 1960s, there were Kong model kits, Kong toys, even an animated Kong TV show. Children embraced the Big Ape as something of a shaggy big brother, one who seemed like as much of a social misfit as they felt they were.
Everybody was kind of grabbing good old Kong, lovable Kong. Kids were responding to him and kind of, as a pet and loving him.
It took me rather a long time to realize the impact of King Kong. It was probably even into the 60s that I had not yet begun to see it as others have seen it.
we return, King Kong heads east for a rumble in the jungle with a Japanese monster movie icon. By the 1960s, the enduring appeal of King Kong was so strong that other movie makers were jumping on the big gorilla bandwagon. The low-budget thriller Konga starred Michael Gough in the story of a scientist whose experiments unleash more than a barrel of monkeys.
The weird thing about Konga is that they would try to do a ripoff of King Kong on this budget. I mean, it's a cheap movie, and boy, does it look it.
Konga, ever-growing man-made beast of immeasurable strength.
Konga's a chimpanzee, but when Michael Gough injects him with grow stuff, he turns into a man in a gorilla suit. I guess they didn't have any men in great big chimpanzee suits available. And he apparently understands English.
I have transformed you into a giant of great strength, and you must obey me.
Which makes it even stranger that at the end, when Michael Gough is yelling, Konga, put me down, you fool.
I said let me down!
Now, I don't know about you, but if a 50-foot gorilla is walking around holding me in his hand, and I know he understands English, the last thing I'm going to call him is a fool.
Konga, towering, terrorizing threat to civilization.
In 1962, King Kong himself made a surprising return to movie screens, turning up a long way from Skull Island or Manhattan. The movie was the low-budget Japanese production, King Kong vs. Godzilla. The film was a long way from the quality of the original Kong, but there was something fitting about the king of Hollywood monsters meeting his Japanese counterpart.
We had the first time anyone had seen King Kong in anything new since 1933, and because you have the classic Japanese monster versus the classic giant American monster.
Unlike his earlier films, this time Kong was played by a guy in a gorilla suit. But young moviegoers, like a pre-Jurassic Park Jeff Goldblum, loved it just the same.
The first big event movie that everybody wanted to see before it came out in my neighborhood was King Kong versus Godzilla.
See King Kong stamp Tokyo into the ground, holding a beautiful girl in his grasp. See Godzilla destroy an entire army.
I saw the trailer of that and I thought, oh, that's the most exciting thing I've ever seen. I must see that.
But nobody can stop the great showdown when King Kong and Godzilla meet to fight for survival of the fittest.
Godzilla has a brain about this size. He is sheer brute force. While Kong is a thinking animal. His brain is considerably larger. About 10 times the size of this gorilla's skull. Being instinctive rivals, there is no doubt that they will attempt to destroy one another.
The day came, and for the first time, these 3 balconies were packed. And the movie started, and they made solid noise the whole way. You could not hear at all. I remember, I've never seen anything like it. You couldn't hear any of the movie, none of it. They were just kind of screaming the whole time and throwing popcorn boxes up in the air. But I remember, I thought it was great. Who would win, Godzilla or King Kong?
There's a mythology about that movie that everyone believed that for Japan, Godzilla won, and in America, King Kong won. It's not true. King Kong basically always won. The Japanese version, too.
But whichever monster won, the movie itself was unquestionably a champion at the box office. And 5 years later, Japanese movie makers brought Kong back for an encore. In 1967's King Kong Escapes, the gorilla got a high-tech makeover, thanks to Mecha Kong, a giant robotic replica who goes head-to-head with his furry forebearer.
A gargantuan duel, unmatched by any battle in history.
You've been
looking high and low for a big car as good as a Volkswagen, maybe you should look into our big car, the Volkswagen 411. It has some things no Volkswagen ever had, like 4 big doors and lots of room and luxury for the whole family. So now, there's a Volkswagen big enough for just about everyone.
During the 1960s and 70s, King Kong was also putting the monkey in monkey business, as his image was used to sell products around the world.
Those numbers are huge.
Oh, it's my new Timex Easy Reader.
They were using Kong in advertising. You know, there were commercials made where it was Kong.
Not again.
Going somewhere? Then don't forget to take along the Sony Slimline Watchman. The super small TV with that tremendous Sony picture.
So it was, once again, a cultural phenomenon.
King Kong had also hung around long enough to inspire and influence a new generation of rising filmmakers.
Look! A beast from 20 million years ago stalks the streets of today.
In 1971, fledgling director John Landis teamed up with his friend, makeup artist Rick Baker, to create Schlock.
No one is safe from Schlock. Schlock. Schlock.
Maybe it wasn't the 8th wonder of the world, but Schlock was an affectionate salute to one of John Landis's favorite films.
Schlock was very much a parody of King Kong and an homage to King Kong.
See the police and National Guard powerless before the awesome creature.
Hold it! Can't you wind that gun, Mindy?
Why not? Schlock was intended to be a little silly. Plus, it was extremely low budget, $60,000. I mean, I actually played the monkey, but Rick Baker did the makeup, which was very advanced for the time.
This thing has been frozen in ice for 20 million years, so I figure it must be lonely.
Ironically, Rick Baker's work on Schlock turned out to be priceless training for what would become the next chapter in the saga of King Kong.
King Kong.
5 years later, Baker designed and wore a state-of-the-art monkey suit in a big-budget remake of the movie that started it all. Producer Dino De Laurentiis' 1976 remake of King Kong starred Jeff Bridges, Charles Grodin, and newcomer Jessica Lange in a modern-day remake.
King Kong, unlike anything you've ever experienced before.
Reflecting the cynical mood of the 1970s, Kong's captors were no longer lovable adventurers, but money-grubbing businessmen. And this time, for his final climb, Kong passed up the Empire State Building in favor of the brand-new World Trade Center.
Probably the reason I ended up doing the remake was because I was such a fan of that movie. Our version was pretty strange. I remember they had Rick Baker, who looked wonderful in this monkey suit. Really kind of spectacular. And then they would cut from him in the suit to this very stiff-looking, giant kind of statue version of King Kong. It always made me laugh.
Dino De Laurentiis put all his confidence in an Italian special effects guy who told him he could build a giant robot that would work for the movie. And of course you can't. And he built this ridiculous thing, millions of dollars, that if you ever see the movie, you see it like 2 shots. And it's obvious. It's like, it doesn't even do anything.
Through most of my career of doing apes, I've been disappointed in that they really don't want real ape movements. When I did the Dino De Laurentiis King Kong, I wanted him to be quadruped and walk on all fours like an ape, and they didn't want that. And they wanted this biped, stupid walk, and I was so much against that, and fought for so many years on film saying, apes don't walk like that, they walk like this, you know.
The most exciting original motion picture event of all time.
The 1976 King Kong climbed to the top of the box office, despite growls from some critics and fans that it was far inferior to the 1933 original. By then, its cast members were ready to move on from a shoot that was filled with its share of real-life scares.
We had some really dangerous times on the set. I remember Jessica Lange in the scene where she's being held in the hand of Kong. Jesse's in the palm of this giant monkey's hand, and John Gillerman, our director, had to go through a translator to give directions to these Italian guys who are on each finger manipulating these hydraulic gears to make the hand close. And John got very frustrated trying to translate, how much the hand should close. And John finally said, "Just watch my bloody hand." He said. He held his hand up like this, and he was, moving his fingers like this. And the guys on the gears were looking at John and trying to do this, and they practically crushed Jesse, just hanging that thing.
When Animal Icons returns, King Kong celebrates his 50th birthday with a helping hand from Hollywood and an old friend. King Kong may have started out a simple country boy on Skull Island, but for over 70 years, he's never left the spotlight as a Hollywood celebrity. By 1986, he'd even become a full-time resident at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, greeting tram-riding tourists with banana-scented breath. By the 1980s, the eighth wonder of the world had also become a highly prized collectible, but only those with Kong-sized wallets could buy actual props from the 1933 film. The surviving pieces from its production include this original Brontosaurus, who achieved screen immortality in the movie by devouring a terrified sailor.
But in terms of Kong collectibles, since it opened, there have been King Kong jokes, King Kong cartoons, King Kong merchandise. Always go to any New York tchotchke, souvenir place. They'll always have an Empire State Building with a gorilla. They'll always have King Kong. At the Academy of Motion Picture, the library, there's the only two remaining American 6 sheets for King Kong. One is in the lobby, and that was given to them by me. Peter Jackson tries to buy objects that were in the movie. Every so often something surfaces. Peter has the dummy that falls. He has that dummy, that little dummy that falls. That stuff you pay a fortune for.
Perhaps the ultimate surviving item from the original movie is this metal armature used by Willis O'Brien to animate Kong back in 1932. These days, it's carefully protected by film historian and performer Bob Burns, who also happens to be one of Hollywood's best-known ape impersonators.
Each little finger moves and works, and it's just amazing to see this. And that's why I've sort of dedicated the rest of my life of just trying to salvage this stuff and keep it so people can see it and see the art that went into this stuff.
In 1983, Bob also lent a helping hand when King Kong celebrated his 50th anniversary. The event was commemorated with a celebrity-packed screening at Grauman's Chinese Theater, where the original Kong had its Hollywood premiere in 1933.
We came up with an idea to rebuild the big giant head that they had in the film that did all the close-ups to be at the Grauman's Chinese Theater in the courtyard like the original head was in 1933. We worked, several weeks on this thing, building it up. The eyes would move, nostrils would flare, and it looked incredible.
Did you think 50 years ago that we would still be watching this film?
If I said yes, you know I'd be pretending. It's become rather a nice feeling to have a public relations individual like Kong, because he is known everywhere. So he's very helpful to me, I think.
Even the Empire State Building helped celebrate its most famous visitor.
In 1983, we decided that we'd do something really special for the anniversary of King Kong. So some people came to us with a plan for a big inflatable King Kong balloon. The plan showed him a certain size and a certain weight. When he was delivered, he was twice that size and twice that weight. So we get him up there, and here's this huge balloon on the side of the building, but he wouldn't hold his air. It actually got a lot more publicity than if it had gone off without a hitch, because every day the news people would say, he's up, he's down, he's flapping in the breeze. So every day everyone was looking to see what condition he'd be in. I don't think we'd ever do that again, though.
When we return, King Kong gets ready for a big screen comeback. The extraordinary world of fantasy conjured up by King Kong continues to inspire today's top movie makers. Steven Spielberg has credited its importance in the creation of Jurassic Park, and in 2004, Lord of the Rings Oscar winner Peter Jackson eagerly began work on a big-budget Kong remake. It would return the Kong story to its original 1930s setting.
It's my favorite movie. It's a film, the original film is one that I am in love with. I mean, I feel passionate about it. And I'm very much aware that we are arriving at a time when there's a generation of children that don't watch black and white films anymore.
Wild, weird, wonderful.
Kong is a wonderful story that inspired me, and I'm hoping that if I can do it justice, if I can try to capture the things that I loved when I was 9 years old, then hopefully it'll continue to be inspirational.
More than 70 years after King Kong first shocked, astounded, and touched the hearts of moviegoers, audiences still can't resist the mythic story of a creature more sympathetic than scary.
A lot of films, they don't have this same perennial magic that King Kong does. Part of it's the character, part of it's the setting, part of it is the great imagination that obviously went into this picture. There's something that makes it appealing to all kinds of people everywhere. The child within us, perhaps.
One of the reasons that we love King Kong and Mighty Joe Young is that they're the underdog, the outcast, so that we always pull for the underdog.
Kong was misunderstood. He was brought out of his environment, so you can't blame him for doing a little destruction.
I'm really happy to be part of something that seems to be American mythology.
The only true test of a movie is time. So often the big hits are like disposable, but this is an indelible part of our culture, and there's something incredibly dynamic and American about it. It's so rich. It's so outrageous, the movie. I love King Kong. I love that picture.